Hey guys, what's up? It's Will back once again for another video here to kick off my channel in 2023. Hope you all had a really good Christmas and New Year. Looking forward to kind of get my channel up and going again. But this is a video here that I made a few years ago with fighters making their way into the UFC. So this video is going to be 10/11 fighters that I think the UFC should sign in 2023. If you like this video, please throw a like on there. It can help me out dramatically. Like I say, I'm going to try and get my channel back on track after a kind of lackluster 2022 due to family issues and personal health reasons and all sorts of things. 2022 was just glad to see the back of it. But this is a video, like I say, I did a few years ago of fighters making their way into the UFC and a very high success rate of guys making their way in to the UFC. And I'll have an honorable mentions list at the bottom as well. So, yeah, let's get into this. I'm going to get this screen up here at the stream and then kind of go from here. So first one up, Christian Leroy Duncan, a guy who, this is kind of the guy that's already signed with the UFC, so I'm not really counting him my top 10 guys, but he is on here. This was going to be my number 2 guy I think the UFC is to sign. Former Cage Warriors middleweight champion, guy who's supposed to fight Jesse Taylor at the end of last year, but something happened, and then they announced in the broadcast he had signed to fight UFC 286 in London at the O2 Arena in March. A really good fight. I've watched his entire career coming through Cage Warriors. I think this is a great time for him to make his way over to the kind of the ultimate proving ground in MMA. A really like a big guy for the division, 6'2", very diversive with his striking, agile, really good footwork, kind of leaps in, can hit you with a lot of different kind of shots. I was really interested to see how he fared against Jesse Taylor, a guy that you might know, fought in the UFC, fought in Cage Warriors, came through tough and so on. But that fight never came to fruition. But he's getting his opportunity here. This was going to be the guy that had number 2. I thought would make his way, and I thought if he won that fight, he would have made his way into the UFC in 2023. So that's kind of my first one that I think that would have made his way, but obviously already has. So moving on, Abdouraguimov, the Lazy King. This is the guy that I think should already be in the UFC. I really do. He's a guy that I thought should have fought UFC Paris. A lot of people were championing him to get that shot there. I thought they would have definitely given him the opportunity, but they never did. He's the Aries champion at 170 pounds. You can see here he's actually got a fight coming up a couple of weeks there, January 20th. Guy's got a really good record, 15-1, with his only loss to Jara El-Salawi, who's a guy that kind of fought in the PFL. But he won the first one, lost the second one, and then he's fought a couple of really decent guys there. Luis Gleesman, Carl Amasu, who's a guy that I think he had a Cage Warriors belt at one point. And like I say, he's got himself a tough fight coming up against Hardwick. Hardwick, I think that's how you pronounce that. But he's an overall really, really solid fighter that I believe should make his way into the UFC this year. Like I said, I really obviously think he should be there already, but I'm a big fan of the Lazy King. I think that he's he will be a really good addition to that division. Paul Hughes is up next. He is the Cage Warriors featherweight champion, coming off an epic performance against Jordan Vucenic and a kind of avenging that close loss that he had way back in 2020, which, to be fair, he could have actually probably got the decision in that one as well. So a guy that obviously I've had an eye on for a long time coming through the Irish MMA scene. He was really good as an amateur as well. And he's really just started to put all together there through his Cage Warriors run. A really, really solid all-round fighter. His striking's coming along. His grappling's really good. His top control's really good. He's just good in kind of all facets. And I think the time, if he doesn't, I think he could probably make another, give himself another title defense. But by the summer, I fully expect this guy to kind of be in the UFC. I think he's kind of made to kind of get into the UFC right now. So good young prospect added to the featherweight division. I think Paul Hughes will be in the UFC in 2023. Lucena Keita. This is a guy that I really, really like fighting. He's the Octagon champion. Really standout win against Ivan Bushinger, who's a kind of real high caliber vet of the European MMA scene. just a great striker, really fun guy to watch. All wins by knockout. I think he fought at the end of December. He was supposed to have a fight there, but it got all cancelled. And then he had a kickboxing match, which he fought a really solid kickboxer and won that one there. I think Octagon is a promotion. You should kind of keep your eye on people coming through there from kind of Middle Eastern Europe that are fighting out of that. I think it's a Czechoslovakian promotion. Really solid fighter. I just think that he will make his way, maybe with a win or two towards the end of the year, into the UFC. Bruno Lopes, LFA champion. 205 has always been guys to come into that division. I think that I kind of thought he would be signed by now, honestly. 11-0 record, defended that belt there, or won the belt, sorry. And if you're in the LFA and you're consistently winning fights, the UFC will pick you up, whether it be a short notice fight or just sign you in general. I think he could have another fight, come in 12-0. I don't think they would put him through the contender series, in all honesty. I think he's a guy that's ready for the UFC now. He was a guy that was coming up and then disappeared from the sport. You can kind of see there through his record, 2015, then never fought to 2021. I just think the time is now really for this guy to come in and add more kind of youth into or just more decent fighters into the 205 division. I think that he could definitely be a ranked fighter as well. So he's a guy that I really do believe that will be in the UFC this year. Muin Gafarov is next up here. You might know this guy, fights out of Tajikistan, 18-4 record, fought in the LFA. You probably would have seen this down in here where he fought Charan Hellinger. Now that's not a good look, but because in Hellinger I don't think it's an overall kind of top class quality fighter, but I do think this guy could very much make his way into the UFC, maybe in a short notice fight or whatever. But I think he's ready. He's rebounded with a couple of wins, like I say, in the LFA there against De Souza and against Silva. And that last one was an absolute beautiful knockout there. And I think the time is now for him. George Hardwick, Cage Warriors, lightweight champion. I'd be surprised if we don't maybe see him signed and fighting at UFC 286 in London by the end of March. I think he's did all he really has to do in Cage Warriors, beat Chris Bungard, beat Kyle Driscoll. Really good fighter, a good, solid striker. His brother's a really solid fighter as well, which one day it wouldn't surprise me if both guys were in the UFC, but I kind of do feel that George is the kind of better fighter right now, but that can always change. I think his time is now. Like I say, he's won the belt, defended the belt. Usually when that happens, you don't really stick around Cage Warriors all too long. So I think George Hardwick will absolutely be in the UFC in 2023. Another one coming out the Cage Warrior stable. Like I say, I watch a lot of Cage Warriors, so there's a lot of guys coming through I think that will make it. This is another one here. Now, he's only 7-0, but he's really, I think 2022 was such a massive year for Caolan Loughran. Really, I thought that the win against Luke Shanks here, who's a former flyweight champion in Cage Warriors, was just the icing on a cake of a really amazing 2022. You see he's got his 3 wins there, all stoppages, all in the second round. And 6 of his 7 fights have finished inside the distance. Ireland needs some new fighters to come through and join Ian Gary in the UFC. And they are coming. Paul Hughes, like I mentioned before, Loughran here. There's James Sheehan coming through. There's other ones that I'm forgetting off the top of my head here. But I think he could fight for a belt next. If he fights for a belt, I fully expect him to kind of win that belt. I think it's Martignoni from Italy that's got that belt there. I think he would beat him and make his way into the UFC. So I think Caolan Loughran will make his way into the UFC in 2023. Now, here's one here that Karim Engizek is a guy fighting out of Germany. I think that if the UFC start to hit mainland Europe again, this guy will be a no-brainer of a signing. If they go back to Germany, I think it's somewhere that they should go back to this year. And a guy that I've had my eye on for many years, fighting out of the kind of EMC promotion, a really solid promotion, a new promotion, but he's got some really decent wins there. And the guy is a finisher. as you can see. I just think this is one of the guys kind of under the radar in European MMA with, like I say, 15 of his 18 wins via stoppage. And like I say, he has been stopped himself a couple of times. Let me have a look at his losses. When was his last loss? 2014. Now we're going back. This guy's a veteran. He's been around a long time. Yasin Ayari, David Zavada, two guys that fought in the UFC. So those losses aren't bad in retrospect. But I think if they hit mainland Europe this year, I think there's a guy that will absolutely make his way into the UFC here. Now, I will say, guys, that there's a bunch of Russians that I could fill this with, but I just don't know whether visas, it's going to kind of help them get into the US. There's been a lot of stuff with that. I've been looking into, I've asked a few people saying that they've got visa problems and this and that, and it's the reason they've never really made their way into the UFC. Like Edward Vartanyan is another one that I think that I'd love to see in the UFC, but supposedly he's got visa problems. Some don't have passports. But moving on here, Azamat Kerefov, 16-0, not your most exciting fighter, but a hard-nosed Russian that will grapple the life out of you and just be heavy on top. Like I say, not the most exciting fighter to kind of move into the UFC, but his record's decent. He's fighting good guys in ACA. He went over to the UE Warriors, which is a promotion that people have came through and went to the UFC. Casey O'Neill's one, for example. She fought there and came through. This is a guy, like I say, he's not a finisher. You can see all by decisions. You look at some of the guys that he's fought there, some of the records are legit records. I just think if he keeps on winning maybe a couple of fights, he's 18-0. If the UFC don't sign him, I can probably see, it wouldn't surprise me if a PFL or a Bellator come in for this guy, or maybe a ONE FC. So, but I think he can make his way to the UFC. That's a guy I think could make it this year. And the last one that I've got on this list here, Asu Almabaev, flyweight. There is so many fighters I could make. I could probably mention 30 fighters I think the UFC should sign, but I kind of had to make my way kind of down to 10 of those here. 17-2 record, fighting out with Kazakhstan, fights out of the really good Brave promotion out there in the kind of Middle East, and he's been finishing guys kind of recently, a couple of wins, but like I say, the flyweights, they don't overly kind of finish all too often, but he's a guy that I've kind of had my eye on with his record. I think there's a lot of guys coming out of Kazakhstan that they could make their way into the UFC, and I know that some people, there's some managers out there that kind of like to kind of target these guys from your Armenia, your Kazakhstan, your Tajikistan, whatever. So if they can get these guys and they can get them all righted out with kind of visas, then I definitely think this is the guy that should kind of make his way into the UFC. 17-2, I mean, that's a legit record, and flyweights always need more fighters in that division. And then kind of moving on to here, here's a list of, there's my list of guys there. And then if you look down into here, there is an honorable mention of fighters to really keep an eye out there. Denis Lavrentiev is a guy that's Peter Yan's. He's a very, very close friend of Peter Yan, a training partner of his. I still think that he should be in the UFC, but he's 34 years old now, going into that bantamweight division. It's not the greatest kind of look. Braga from Brazil there, I think he could make his way. Joshua Van, Valeska Machado. I forgot to put some records for these guys. Vladimir Mineev, Rustam Kerimov, Levi Mowles, Eldar Eldarov. I think he should probably be given a shot in the UFC. Kamil Magomedov, Luke Riley, and Lonia Kavanagh, two of the bright prospects, I think, in the UK coming through Cage Warriors that you may have seen already. Giovanna Canuto is one that I've got my eye on. Marcel Marquez, Felix Klinkhammer, Vartanyan is a guy, like I said, I think should probably be in the UFC with a great record like that. He's fought legit guys. I think I don't think the UFC will ever be going back to Russia anytime soon. But if they could get some of these guys on that show, I think the UFC could be inundated with Russian champions if they let some of these guys in. They've got so much talent out there. Adam Masiev's a guy I've got my eye on. Magomed Karbadiev is another one. And then we've got, I'm not going to pronounce that name, Cham Sardunov is another guy that I really, really like there. So, guys, that's just a quick 15-minute video there of me just mentioning some guys I think will make their way into the UFC, and then an honourable mentions list there. So, like I say, tomorrow I am going to be having my video, my early insight for UFC it'll be 284, I think. Jamal Hill against Glover Teixeira, just an early look into where I might be going there and some of the matchups that they have on tap for that card. And then I'll have my predictions out next week for UFC fight night. I want to say 67. Nasruddin Imavov against Kelvin Gastelum there. So guys, thank you very much. If you could throw a like in the video. If you've not subscribed and you like what you see, then throw a sub in the video there and help me kind of grow the channel with me. So until then, guys, all the best. Take care, and I'll see you soon.